I get to introduce the Vassall Lecture. Before I do the introduction for the Vassall Lecture on health equity, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the person who it's named after, who is not dead. He's sitting right there. Wave, Dr. Vassall. Yeah, okay, great. This is the 5th year we've done this. Dr. John Vassall is a master in the American College of Physicians and has actually won the Weinberger Award from the National Organization for Physician Leadership. But in this specific space, we do this with his name attached to it because he has been leading real change in the health equity space for far longer than it has been fashionable to do so. So our gratitude for that. This year, our speaker is Dr. Jason Dean. Dr. Dean is a member of the Blackfeet Nation and is going to be speaking to us about Indigenous health. He has a really long CV, like it's taking up most of my screen, so I'm not going to subject you to all of that. I will tell you that he is originally trained as a pediatrician, but now practices primarily cardiology and in both pediatrics and internal medicine. And I invited him here because he is the Director for Indigenous Health for the University of Washington, but also because he runs a study called the Strong Heart Study, which has had this huge impact on Native and Indigenous health. So, Dr. Dean, come on up. Thank you.
Thanks much. So Kinexkoi, Nachanako, Jason Dean, so I said hello relatives in my tribal language, so I'm going to flip it a little bit, and I think more we're going to talk about just how to sustain ourselves, those of us who are on this health equity journey. I did start to cull together a talk about Indigenous health, but it just seemed to ring hollow, especially in these perilous times, because as you all know, because of the Medicaid cuts, because of federal threats, because of decreasing indirects for research, the way we practice medicine and we see adults is going to change. So those of us on this health equity journey, really, how do we not only fortify ourselves, but fortify our communities and our students. Oops. So I don't have any disclosures. But I love Calvin and Hobbes. I usually mention at this point that I'm a Med-Peds physician. Any Med-Peds folks here? Yes. Med-Peds has really shaped how I approach not only my adult practice, my adult cardiology practice, but my pediatric practice. And I do things kind of Med-Pedsy on both spectrums. So I'm an adult congenital heart disease provider. And my research with the Strong Heart Study is really focused on early life predictors of atherosclerotic disease in Native youth. So Med-Peds has really been important to me and really instrumental in my career. So any students here interested in Med-Peds, please approach me. All right. So it's been a tough year for all of us, I would say. Whenever I am feeling kind of lost, I definitely shift to self-care related around the arts. I love music and those sorts of things, but I want to start out with two paintings, and I shamelessly stole this from a good and brilliant friend of mine, Dr. Q Wen. She is a general pediatrician at the University of Utah. She is the vice chair for EDI in the Department of Pediatrics there, and she's an art history major, so she taught me she taught me about Socrates, and then we'll talk about Galileo in the next slide. So this is a painting from 1787. It's called The Death of Socrates by Jacques-Louis David. And it's a neoclassical painting from just before the French Revolution, and depicts the Greek philosopher Socrates, who is convicted of impiety and corruption of Athenian youth by the Athenian courts. So you see him there with his finger raised, but he was sentenced to death for the crime of asking political and philosophic questions of his students, which resulted in 2 accusations of moral corruption and impiety. So they actually gave Socrates the choice between dying or living, renouncing his beliefs and living. But rather than renouncing his beliefs, he died willingly, expounding on the immortality of the soul before he drank that cup of poisonous hemlock that you see one of his disciples holding up for him. So what is truth, really? That's kind of what I wanted to kind of ask discussing these two paintings. So this is a painting in the 19th century. It was by Joseph Nicholas Robert Fleury, and it's called Galileo Before the Holy Office. So in 1633, Galileo was condemned to death for heresy during the Roman Catholic Inquisition, and this is for upholding heliocentrism, the astronomical model in which the Earth and other planets revolve around the sun. So this was at odds with the teaching of the Catholic Church. He was also given the choice between living or dying, but instead of accepting death, as Socrates did, he renounced his views and did not teach or defend his heliocentric ideas. So he remained under house arrest until his death in 1642. So of course, neither the Socratic method of scientific thinking nor the heliocentric model died with these two men, and these truths persisted now really because others carried on their work, okay? And it was the community that came together to preserve, study, and further develop their work. And that's really the reason why we have progression of science in general. So I just want you to think about that. Truths, the whole truths, and some known unknowns. We'll get to that later. Carl Sagan was an American astronomer, and he famously said that science is a way of thinking much more than a body of knowledge. And what I think he was getting at was the notion that the basis of truth is communal. It requires a generalized agreement about what to believe and what not to believe. And this really should only be after dedicated scientific inquiry in the scientific method. So being skeptical with our inquiry, that's what Socrates taught us. Thinking critically, and most of all, questioning the general notion of truth, especially when that truth has led us astray. So this requires understanding of human fallibility. So, I mean, we should be giving each other grace and acknowledging that we all make mistakes. We really cannot get into the emotional pleas for truth that makes us feel a certain way, but really seeing truth after questioning and seeking evidence. And this is the basis of our specialty of internal medicine. So scientific knowledge has really shifted over time because of our critical inquiry of truth. So this diagram depicts phrenology, which is a racist pseudoscience from the 19th century. It was developed by a German physician named Franz Joseph Gall. It postulated that a person's character and mental traits could be determined by the shape or protuberances of their skulls. He thought that the brain was a muscular organ, and if you used certain parts of that muscle more than others, they grew bigger and affected the shape of the skull. So while largely debunked by rigorous scientific inquiry in the mid-19th century, it really influenced the notion of cerebral localization and eventually led to modern neuroscience. But this, in general, if we think about these kind of ancient ways of thinking, this is a reminder that really science is larger than any one of us, that phrenology influenced both eugenics and neurology, that Socrates was killed for his scientific method, yet asking a beleaguered senior resident in medicine how she prefers to teach her interns, we'll see that the Socratic method is alive and well. And even Galileo renounced his science, and we know the truth and celebrate our annual trips around the sun. That communities of scientists refine our knowledge over time, leading to accepted facts only after debate and study, and that the scientific method overall would trump culture, and it endures. So this is not to say that we are perfect by any means. Sagan's notion of scientific truth really remains aspirational today, I would say. So in this study in Annals published last year, patients experienced less hospital 30-day mortality and readmission rates if they were treated by a female physician. So this is part of a growing body of literature detailing the benefits of receiving treatment from female physicians, especially if the patient themselves is female. So therefore, we as physicians and scientists really should be focused on training more female physicians, right? So in creating pathways to internal medicine, creating pathways to our subspecialties, all for the betterment of our patients. But this has not happened. Now, although most medical students entering the U.S. medical schools are currently women, there's still a disparity regarding women in medicine. So this is best studied in academic medicine from this recent AAMC gender equity report. So you see here that there's a telescoping of representation as we move along the academic spectrum. So while it's true that most matriculants in medical school are women, so 57%, graduates are 52%, there's a general attrition as we move along this academic spectrum to only 25% of women being department chairs. So this lack of progress in training our female physicians really has consequences globally for our practices, not only for the patient, but for the physician herself. So the consequences of gender inequities in academic medicine are lower publication rates, less NIH funding, fewer roles as researchers and clinical PIs, less recognition, fewer rewards by a subspecialty society, and less advancement to senior roles in leadership. So we know our truths. We really have not lived up to those values, though. But we must be able to learn something from the business world, right? So all these fancy leadership courses that some of us have taken really rely on the Harvard Business Review as source material. And many of the courses taught are taught themselves by business professionals. So they've really extolled the benefits of diversity, of the benefits of EDI work. So in the business world, diversity has been shown to increase innovation revenues by almost 20%. They increase performance advantage over those workplaces that are more homogeneous by about 35%. And they make businesses about 36% more profitable, so over a third. So really, many companies have had a recent focus on EDI, particularly after the killing of George Floyd and through the COVID-19 pandemic. This really, I think, reflected our shared value of equity, especially after we witnessed an egregious and offensive killing in Minneapolis. But this focus, unfortunately, was short-lived, and it sharply decreased this year. So you can see that this is the companies that mentioned EDI work. It was kind of lower. It was quite robust the last 4 years, and then has dropped off. So what we're seeing now is really a decline in programming to support diversity, even though it is wildly profitable for companies. So again, these are truths that we know, that we have looked at through science, but are we living through them? Are we letting the culture affect what we're really doing? So these are the changes between 2024 and 2025 in regards to a company's commitment to EDI work. So you can see that, thankfully, most of it stayed about the same, but there were definitely some changes here. Any Minecraft fans here? My son is really into Minecraft. So now we see both in medicine and business that it seems that we're denying obvious truths for the benefit of equity work, the benefit of EDI initiatives. And we're really denying our shared values of equity for all, and instead deferring to current cultural trends regarding the waning interest and support of EDI. But how did we get here? Why has our progress stalled in this regard? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some case law and kind of set the stage as far as what's going on in the U.S. right now. So let's first examine the Affordable Care Act, a very important piece of legislation, especially for my patients with adult congenital heart disease who have had problems obtaining insurance before this was passed. But the Affordable Care Act had a section called 1557. It was really, we're going to examine that as a point of prior progress and a benchmark to what we can refer to now. So section 1557 was the non-discrimination provision of the ACA. This provision prohibited medical discrimination in certain health profession programs and activities based on race, color, national origin, which is important now, sex, age, or disability. So, of course, these health programs were organized and funded by the federal government to become eligible for these protections. In 2024, these went into effect in 2016. These protections were not enforced as much as we would like during the first Trump term, But in 2024, the Biden administration expanded these protections, and they included gender identity, sexual orientation, pregnancy-related conditions, including abortion, and he also expanded protections for transgender care and coverage as well for those who have had low English proficiency. So unfortunately, these protections have been rolled back this year, but the initial ACA law with its section 1557 is still the law. So these are things that we can refer to say, hey, the things that we're seeing now really are unlawful. So that's the basic kind of healthcare kind of legislation. I'm going to switch a little bit towards medical school admissions and talk about the importance of affirmative action and what situation we're in now. So in 1978, the University of California versus Bakey case was before the Supreme Court. At the time, the University of California system had held 16 medical school seats for underrepresented minority students in their first-year class. So Alan Bakey sued UC Davis, and he claimed that he was more qualified than some of the applicants that he had himself assessed. And yeah, I'm not really sure. Whoops, sorry about that. And he argued that he faced racial discrimination. So the U.S. Supreme Court ruled actually in favor of Bakey and actually admitted him to UC Davis. I'm not sure what he's doing now. But they stated that the practice of racial quotas violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and that prohibited racial discrimination in federally funded programs. However, the court did affirm during this ruling that the absence of strictly enforced quotas, in the absence of those quotas, that race could be considered along with a multitude of other factors in medical school admissions. So really it kind of upheld the notion of affirmative action. So hence this decision really set the precedent and maintained affirmative action programs in the United States and allowed race to be part of a holistic view in many medical school admissions processes. So then, in 2003, we had the Grutter versus Bollinger Supreme Court case, which basically upheld the Bakey case. So, Barbara Grutter was applying to law school. She had quite a good LSAT score, quite a high GPA, but she was not admitted to the University of Michigan Law School, and she maintained that she was racially discriminated against because she was denied admission. So in her majority opinion, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor upheld that the Constitution doesn't prohibit the law school's narrowly tailored use of race in admissions decision to further a compelling interest in obtaining educational benefits that flow from a diverse student body. She also went on to say that, that race-conscious admission policies must be limited in time, and maybe short-sightedly, she said that the court expects that 25 years from now, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary to further the interest approved today. I guess she didn't really see about all the things that were happening. I will say that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was also on the court during that time, and she did not agree with this latter point. So she understood that this is something that we needed to feed over time, and that equity issues were really fragile. So these were really the two sets of case law that really upheld, the importance of diversity in our school admissions. It really detailed that a diverse student body is beneficial. But 20 years after this latter case, the U.S. Supreme Court heard the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case. And this, in effect, overruled both the Grutter versus Bollinger case and the University of California versus Bakey case. In that ruling, it said that affirmative action in undergraduate student admissions to Harvard violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and really this ended the practice of considering race in undergraduate admissions. But it maintained that race-related experiences could be a factor in a holistic review of the applicant. So it's kind of like a new don't ask, don't tell situation. So the court furthermore ruled that the goals of diversity in higher education were too amorphous for the judges to really put a hard endpoint on, so they were ignored. So unfortunately, this has led to widespread confusion for not only admissions committees in upper campus programs, but also our medical schools and other professional schools. Colleges have adopted race-neutral admissions, which aren't necessarily very forward-thinking or backward-thinking. But they are allowed to consider how race has affected an applicant's life, such as discussing their personal experiences with discrimination or inspiration, provided that this is tied to their character or abilities. So wildly damaging decision, I would say. So this study was published in August of this year, 2025, in JAMA, and it really looked at the URM matriculants to U.S. medical schools in 2024, and this was compared to the years 2019 to 2023, and it found that there were about 500 fewer URM matriculants. So more to come on this. I would imagine this would continue to be a concerning number. So really, that's really it as far as the bulk of the federal case law that we as physicians really need to interface with. So there are discrimination protections in the ACA. So those of our patients who receive Medicaid, Medicare, our VA patients, our Indian Health Service patients, they have these protections. And then we need to shift to holistic admission practices for medical school. I mean, really that's it. But the culture regarding equity, as we've seen, is really turning. Okay, it's turning hostile. And this is because of dominant culture in the U.S. right now. So despite our known truth that health equity improves patient outcomes and has benefits for us as physicians along with our patients, we've seen a flurry of federal executive orders this year attacking EDI initiatives. And these are just some of them. I'm not even going to read them. But it's just important to know that these executive orders are not based upon data or scientific inquiry at all, kind of like HHS right now. But, so they are vague and confusing, and frankly, they are unlawful. So, but unfortunately, they're effective. And they're effective because of the culture, okay? They're not effective because of some underlying proven truth. So despite judicial intervention blocking the limits on some of these EDI programs, there continues to be confusion and stifling effects on many EDI initiatives nationwide, including at my institution, the University of Washington. So what we're seeing at the University of Washington is we have gotten several lawsuits lately from HHS, both for our clinical programs as well as some of our training programs. We've had to make kind of nominal changes to some of the names and things like that, but in general have been able to continue them. There have been quite a bit of attacks on our gender clinic at Children's, which is organized through the University of Washington. So just things that we are kind of dealing with that don't really have kind of a basis in the law. But unfortunately, it doesn't stop federal suits, which is expensive for the university and further limits care. So it's been quite disruptive. So I think more concerning than these executive orders, which are unlawful, which are being struck down in court. State law is really following this culture attacking equity initiatives, including several states, including our whammy state of Idaho. Many of these states have passed anti-EDI laws. Idaho, Utah, the Dakotas, Florida, of course. So this is not something that we can kind of overcome. I mean, once there is a state law against EDI initiatives, I mean, it's something that is insurmountable unless there's another law. So my good friend, Dr. Wen in Utah is really dealing with this at the University of Utah, and she is finding it very, very disruptive to not only her career, but the careers of her mentees and trainees. So this is a list of words that are disappearing from federal websites and communications. You can pick your favorite here. It's pretty depressing to read through this list. Some of these include diversity, race, woman, breastfeeding, at risk. So these words are disappearing from federal communications, from published documents, reports, through the federal government, through HHS, really all over the federal government. So, I mean, this is a way that culture, that untruthful, unlawful culture really is kind of percolating through and making it to our daily lives. And unfortunately, things have gotten worse. I don't know how you all feel about how things have gone this year, but it's been way worse than I thought it was going to be. So unfortunately, things have devolved, and we're now seeing anti-equity culture threatening scientific inquiry and discovery. And this is something that all of you as academic folks I know are kind of dealing with on a day-to-day basis. In this press release by Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, he described EDI initiatives as advancing neo-Marxist class warfare propaganda. And I don't even know what that means. It sounds really scary. And the people who are reading this are probably scared by it. So again, is this true scientific kind of inquiry, or is this something that's culturally based? But again, unlawful, but effective. So, many of the federal centers are controlled by folks who are more interested in culture than scientific inquiry, I would say. And the Center for Disease Control and Prevention is really complying with some of these anti-equity executive orders, and they've ordered a pullback of scientific papers coming out of its organization. These papers are subject to internal and external review. We don't really know much about who the external reviewers are. But a lot of the editors of the bigger scientific journals really question legality, as we all should, of all of these moves. But again, there's little we can do about them now. So these direct federal attacks on scientific inquiry have continued. So I think back to Socrates and Galileo often. So the NIH really sought to terminate hundreds of EDI-related grants it deemed discriminatory. It was also ordered to cull leadership at NIH, and several directors of national groups were asked to step down. And this included, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, and the National Institute on Nursing Research. They were all informed late March that they were being placed on administrative leave. I think altogether these four leaders oversaw $9 billion in federal research funding. So even grants not organized within these centers, things have been slow. Our own grant for the Strong Heart Study is organized through NHLBI. And unfortunately, for timing, our grant is up in the next couple years, and just the communications have been very slow and very disruptive to our overall work. I don't know if anyone read the Maha report. It came out in September. So this is the Make America Healthy Again report. It was released and really focused on child health. So me as a pediatrician, I really like that. It really focused on 4 potential causes for the rising prevalence of chronic disease in kids: poor diet, chemical exposure, lack of exercise, and chronic stress. All things that we as pediatricians really agree with, to be honest with you. Unfortunately, many of the report's recommendations were at odds with ongoing federal actions. We're seeing that now with the SNAP benefits thing. So, for example, that the report recommended revisions to the nutritional guidelines and healthier food in schools, and SNAP has been halted. SNAP food assistance in general has been defunded. Medicaid programs have been defunded. So so things are chaotic, to say the least. The report contained non-existent studies that were probably generated by AI. In general, the report continued the administration's attack on science and truth by sowing mistrust in research and attacking medical progress. And I think most depressing for me is the report seemed to blame families for choices that they had to make when they were caring for these children, including under-resourced families. And this was at, they were blaming the families instead of really examining the system and the system of adverse social drivers of health that affect how and at what setting the families raise their children. So quite backwards. Sorry, this is so small. These were the commission members, many confirmed and unconfirmed cabinet members for the current federal administrative cabinet. There were two physicians in this group. Martin McCrae as FDA commissioner and Jay Bhattacharya as NIH director. So Dr. McCary is a surgical oncologist, and Dr. Bhattacharya is a health economist. I don't believe he ever did residency. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Neither man is a pediatrician or has any training in pediatrics. So whose truth are they really elevating here? So more recently, we've seen judicial intervention against NIH grants, which is a good thing, because again, a lot of these actions are unlawful. And even Dr. Bhattacharya said that there weren't meaningful differences between the reinstated and terminated grants from NIH, and many of these grants should be reinstated. Many of these grants explored vaccine hesitancy. We at Children's lost quite a few grants, a malarial vaccine, mRNA vaccines. These explored LGBTQ2S plus health, and they explored other racial health inequities. However, in August of this year, the U.S. Supreme Court, in their infinite wisdom, really ruled that the administration could cancel any of these NIH grants, and they stayed a lower court's decision saying that these cuts were discriminatory. So in effect, the court is allowing the administration to halt funding while the case moves forward. The case for appeal moves forward, and the long-term fate of these grants really remains uncertain. Really, this has just a cooling effect on science, and researchers have expressed their concerns about their job losses and interruption of their critical public health research. So, again, chaos has been kind of my top word this year. So this has created a whiplash effect. Do we have a grant? Do we not have a grant? Should we put grants in? That really stifles scientific inquiry. And it's leaving many of us who participate in health equity research to consider putting that work aside. And I really worry about our trainees and junior faculty in this regard. So how do we retool equity work in a climate and culture where equity is not prioritized and in many cases attacked? So needless to say, there are many known unknowns, to use Donald Rumsfeld's term, about the really effective next steps that we should take as a scientific community. All right, so what are we going to do? So I'm going to talk about three things that you can consider, that would help us navigate this chaos, that will help us stay aligned to our scientific truths, to the scientific method, and help us follow our values. And more importantly, I want you to ask yourself, how do we help our trainees sustain their nascent careers, especially those that are interested in health equity, because we really need them in the future. All right, so the first thing that we can do, I think, is contingency planning. Contingency planning is a process of developing a set of predetermined actions to respond to a specific event that could disrupt normal operations. I bet all of us are thinking that nothing has been normal this year. It really involves analyzing potential risks and detailing a plan B, or C, or D, and establishing clear procedures to minimize the negative effects of unexpected events. But now we are headlong into these unprecedented times. We should really be considering how to protect ourselves, our work, and our trainees. So really we have to think to ourselves, what's in our go bag here? Okay, what tools do we have that we can rely on? One thing that we did, I'll bring in a little bit of Indigenous health stuff in this section, something that we did as a university, members of federally recognized tribes are members of sovereign nations, basically. So there's a government-to-government agreement through treaties to provide health care, health education, those sorts of things from the U.S. federal government to tribes. Now, when the anti-EDI executive orders really came out, they were talking about canceling all of our Indigenous health kind of initiatives. So what we did is we went back to case law. I worked with lawyers, and we had some of that case law detailed for the folks at the university. So that was the biggest contingency planning that we did earlier this year. So really, I want you to ask yourselves, what is in your go bag, and if you don't have things in your go bag, what are the resources that you can do, that you can participate in to kind of fill that go bag? So there are several leadership development courses. This is probably the most well-known at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. But there are similar things through AAMC. There are similar things through the University of Washington. So really, if you don't have much in your go bag, you can really seek out courses in your home institutions or nationally that can help you fill that go bag and really help you develop these tools. Because what we really want to do is we want to realign our values. We can't lose sight of them, okay? Because we know that we know what's truth and we know what's maybe untrue. So it's worth setting the stage that really kind of fulfills those values. So we know health equity is our strength. Okay, that's been health equity has been a cornerstone of quality healthcare delivery for 25 years. So we know that health equity is our strength. We cannot let external forces label this as a weakness. So again, for 25 years, equity has been at the table as one of our established scientific truths. And it remains one of the 6 aims of high-quality healthcare. And it can be argued that there's been movement on a lot of the other domains and maybe less in the equity domain. And we're seeing how fragile that support of health equity is now, especially in the current environment. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are power in numbers. I mean, I'm really glad to be here with all of you. And that we should learn to rely on not only each other, but our professional groups to help us rally around these causes, these truthful causes that we know are for the common good. So after HHS changed the vaccine recommendations and schedule for adults, the American College of Physicians stood in the breach. And ACP really acted as a bulwark against misinformation, misinformed science, and other faulty data. And ACP joined several other medical professional groups, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, to sue HHS over these vaccine changes. So you can read about these in annals. So ACP has called for a change in leadership as well and offered us internists decision-making tools that can help us counsel our patients and help us really navigate these increasingly difficult conversations that we have with them. So again, something else that you can consider to be in your tool bag, and ACP membership. So. We also need to think about where we are going to get our information to help us with our informed decision making. So what if PubMed goes dark? I mean, it's a federally funded service. So what if it just disappears? So personally, I really dug out some of my old textbooks. I made sure that I can access Harrison's from our UW library. I've been making a point of saving PDFs of my frequently referenced papers on a separate hard drive. Faculty in my center at the University of Washington, I printed out all of their recent papers. It's something that we should kind of think about, because really, we all know what the truth is, but where can we find these things? And we need to kind of preserve these things for ourselves. So it's worth remembering that there are other online search forums for scientific papers that work similar to PubMed, and the biggest one is Ovid Medline. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So lastly, in this section, I want to encourage you to bring your authentic selves to your work, either in clinic or your lab or your administrative suite. Be aware and forward with your vulnerabilities, I would say. This is a way to bring your true and authentic self. Try not to be jaded or grumpy as these external threats seem overwhelming, and I struggle with this all the time. So this often requires heavy lifting of self-care, and it's well worth the effort regarding the quality of care and the quality of science that comes from this internal work. So this is an older paper from Annals, and it's worth remembering that showing up authentically benefits those around us. The patient-provider racial concordance provides quality of care, increases quality of care for patients. I was in Alaska earlier this week, we were just talking about, and when I approached my indigenous patients with an appropriate handshake, when I called some of the elders auntie, there was a palpable softening in the room and really a relaxed feeling, even within myself. So bring your authentic selves really is something that you can do, not only for the benefit of your patients, but for the benefit of yourself. So just ask yourself, what's in your go bag? What are your tools that you are leveraging during this difficult time? So my next recommendation is to keep telling your stories. This is very important. There's that new section in JAMA IM called Inside Story. It's one of my favorite sections of any JAMA publication. So I just want to read a little bit of the section from the editorial that announced this. So the importance of stories and storytelling in medicine and science should not be underestimated. So while vigorous scientific evidence is central to advancing medicine and healthcare, the value of stories to comprehend, communicate, contextualize, and translate the evidence into practice and policy is vital. So anecdotes and narratives help clinicians personalize care, learn from individual perspectives and experiences, and embrace the fallibility yet extraordinary humanity of all we do in medicine. So moreover, storytelling is key to turning abstract statistical or scientific evidence into real-world examples to help decision-making by policymakers and patients and ourselves. With this new section, JAMA says they acknowledge that not all questions have answers, and I think that that's important to recognize right now. And not all problems, especially the ones that we're having right now, have solutions. This section allows us to move beyond knowledge to meaning through writing, and interprets and tries to make sense of events, knowledge, experiences, relationships, and the self. So definitely something that we need right now. When I work with my philanthropic partners, both through University of Washington and through the Washington State Legislature, sorry about this. Getting a little. Apologize. So again, when I work with my philanthropic partners, they really stress that physicians are really some of the best storytellers that they work with. I would kind of challenge you, those of you who are looking for external funding, interested in really not approaching the NIH right now, that you should bring those stories to non-governmental organizations and other philanthropic groups. So in this current environment, you will likely find an audience that shares your values and makes and wants to make a difference in people's lives like you do. So Mackenzie Scott just recently gave a large gift to Howard University, which is a wonderful university out in Washington, D.C., and it marked one of the school's largest donations in its storied history. So, tell your stories, think about your stories, tell them to others, create community. That's something that we do through our group as well. We often get together with our other Native faculty members, our residents, our medical students, and we really just kind of talk to each other. So my final section, I want to really encourage you to foster community. Okay, so this is equally as important. So I'm really glad that this meeting took place. This is really something that's beneficial not only to ourselves, but our trainees, because relationships matter, especially now relationships matter. We are all in this together, and we should take time to check in with each other. So our trainees who are just starting out their careers in health equity really need to see that we are either weathering or even not weathering this storm, because each has equal importance in this situation. So, so this is a picture of the UW Medicine Residencies Diversity Committee. I'm not sure if any of those folks are here. But it's worth remembering that, the younger generation are much more comfortable with talking openly about health equity than a Gen Xer like me. We didn't have these conversations when I was in medical school. And we should be nurturing those conversations and frankly learning from them. We should be actively listening. So, other tips are be careful about the language that you use. Please focus on strength-based experiences. These strength-based experiences can temper, but they don't negate our negative ones, which is a good lesson. Develop supporting mentorship structures, which are really needed now more than ever. And if you feel uncomfortable with some of the basic concepts of health equity, consider participating in the foundational bias reduction course, where you can have discussions with folks who are at the same stage in their own health equity journey. And if you feel safe enough, really consider actively championing equity in whatever capacity you have room for. It can be at the public policy level. This is something that I've focused on for the past several years. It can be at the community level, the institutional level. What are you doing at your school? It could be between folks that you see in clinic, other faculty members. It can be at an individual level. But just if you feel psychologically safe, please consider doing something at one of these levels. And I'll end by saying that Socrates and Galileo made different personal decisions about their own capacity for advocacy and their wishes for their personal safety, yet their truth endured. And our notion of our truth will also endure, that we strive for a fair and respectful environment where all individuals feel valued, supported, and welcomed. Thanks.